Jewish Channel's Week in Review. The terror attacks in Paris last week and their fallout, a famed matzah factory moves towards shutdown, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. 4 Jews were killed in Paris after they and more than a dozen other individuals were held hostage by Islamic terrorists last Friday at a kosher grocery store. A funeral in Jerusalem saw thousands in attendance, including some who had flown in from France for the funeral. For many, the attack on the kosher grocery store was immediately associated with the killings at the office of satirical newspaper Charlie Hebdo. And there, too, evidence increasingly points to a specifically anti-Jewish motivation in killing one of the victims. Elisa Kayat was a columnist at the newspaper and notably was the only woman killed in the attack. Witnesses have said that the attackers repeatedly emphasized that they were not planning to kill women as they roamed the newspaper's offices. Kayat, who is Jewish, had reportedly received threatening phone calls, according to an interview with Kayat's cousin. "You dirty Jew, stop working for Charlie Hebdo. If you don't, we will kill you," the terrorists are reported to have said in phone calls to Kayat prior to the attack. Now, what to do about these targeted attacks on Jews? According to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the solution lay some hundreds of miles to the east.
לכל יהודי אירופה, אני מבקש לומר, מדינת ישראל היא לא רק המקום שאליו אתם מתפללים, מדינת ישראל היא גם הבית שלכם.
Netanyahu's comments, alongside those of other Israeli leaders, drew a sharp response from the director of the European Jewish Association, Rabbi Menachem Margolin. The Israeli government must stop this Pavlovian response every time there is an attack against Jews in Europe, Margolin said, adding, "I regret that after every anti-Semitic attack in Europe, the Israeli government dispenses the same statements about the importance of Aliyah rather than take all measures at its disposal in order to increase the safety of Jewish life in Europe. Every such Israeli campaign severely weakens and damages the Jewish communities that have the right to live securely wherever they are." Meantime, the discussion of Jews as victims has led to some surprising anecdotes in which Jews were essentially blamed for their own suffering because of Israel's actions. In this clip, BBC reporter Tim Wilcox is interviewing a Jewish woman remotely. Pay attention to his response to her remarks.
We have to not to be afraid to say that the Jews are they are the target now. It's not only
many critics, though, of Israel's policy would suggest that the Palestinians suffer hugely at Jewish hands as well.
Now, Wilcox did apologize on Twitter, writing, quote, "Really sorry for any offense caused by a poorly phrased question in a live interview in Paris yesterday. It was entirely unintentional." In domestic news, the continued fading of an old way of doing Jewish business in America is evidenced by the planned move of the Streits Matzos factory from its home of nearly a century in New York City's Lower East Side, as Meredith Gansman reports.
Aaron Gross may not walk down Rivington Street again after April. That's because after 90 years, the Streits Matzos baking factory will be closing its doors, selling the space to a real estate developer, and leaving the Lower East Side with one less piece of the traditional neighborhood. Longtime Lower East Side institutions such as Ratner's Dairy Restaurant, Shapiro Wine Company, and Schmolke Bernstein's have been closed for over a decade. Now with the closing of Streits Matzos Factory, Katz Delicatessen, Yonah Schimmel's Knish Bakery, and Russ & Daughters seems to be all that remains of the Jewish food establishments.
It's going to be very difficult to see. I don't know if I'll be able to come around this block.
Aaron Gross runs Streits Matzos with his cousins Alan Adler and Aaron Yagoda. His great-great-grandfather, Aaron Streit, founded the matzah company in 1916, a few blocks away from its current working location, which opened in 1925. Streits now manufactures and distributes matzah and other kosher products around the world. And it is the only family-owned matzah baking business in the U.S., though at one time there were 4 such matzah bakeries in the country. Although the factory is moving from the Lower East Side after almost a century, the Streits matzah making process will remain unchanged.
I think the important part of the oven is convection. So if we go with the convection oven, and then it's the sheeting process. It's being able to put all those layers in.
The ovens are more than 60 years old and bake between 900 and 1,000 pounds of matzah an hour. Gross says the factory is moving because it's become too difficult to continue the business in Manhattan.
It's really just to remain competitive and remain, keep the Streits entity strong for future generations.
Upper East Sider Michael Goldberg was raised on the Lower East Side.
For the holidays, we came to Streits to get our matzah. It wasn't officially Passover until you had that box of Streits Matzos in the house.
What will replace the factory?
I want it to be something that adds value to the neighborhood.
For more on Streits Matzah Baking Factory, tune into the full broadcast version of The Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. Speaking about the old way of doing things in Jewish America, Christian Needon discovers that there was once a right way and a wrong way to write a Yiddish letter. Here is his report.
Die Krankheit von der Mutter hat uns allen krank gemacht. Hat zerstört unser Geschäft und unser Haus gemacht, a Bargash.
A unique form of correspondence written for Yiddish-speaking 19th century Jews came to life last week in Brooklyn. Actors read excerpts from letter-writing manuals, known as Briefstellers, created for Jews in Russia and America, and which have been collected into the book Dear Mendel, Dear Reisel by Colgate professor Alice Nakimovsky and Roberta Newman of the YIVO Institute. Nakimovsky visited Congregation Mount Sinai in Brooklyn Heights to give a presentation about the manuals with the help of actors Yelena Shmulinson and Alan Lewis Rickman. And ahead of the event, Nakimovsky stopped by TJC to discuss the benefit of Briefstellers for their Jewish users.
People were very concerned about looking dignified. And if they didn't have the kind of education that they wanted, which would be many, many people, they needed something to copy from. So these letter manuals provided people who were a little bit uncertain with letters to copy and use for all occasions.
She added that the authors of these manuals made them an entertaining read while serving as examples of social propriety.
They not only taught you how to write properly and grammatically in Yiddish, but they also taught you how to behave. So pedagogues were very interested in that, and novelists were interested in that. The novelists have the best ones, because they kind of have plots. Like you get a letter, and then there's an answer.
And reading them aloud highlights the drama and humor within those plots.
The brother is writing to the sister, I just heard somebody passing through my town told me Mom is sick. I feel so terrible. I haven't been there. I can't come. I'm too busy, but here's some money. Please take care of her. Go to fancy doctors. Da, da, da. There are two separate letters of response from the sister. Both of them are extremely Jewish, too. The first one is, oh, she's suffering. Oh, the pain, the sickness. Oh, it's horrible. You can't even imagine how sick. Oi, oi, oi. And the second was a guilt trip. Oh, you couldn't find time to come visit your mother? No, it's okay. No, it's not important. In Yiddish.
To see more from the Briefsteller event, Dear Mendel, Dear Reisel, at Congregation Mount Sinai, please tune in to the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. Finally, this week on Up Close, we're looking at two memoirs of experience in authoritarian regimes. Is the story of Iran one that should leave you with hope? That's the message former New York Times reporter Nazila Fatih wants to give, even though she's living in exile because of threats of assassination. We discuss her memoir of growing up during and through the Iranian Revolution, The Lonely War, one woman's account of the struggle for modern Iran. And then there's very little we know about life inside North Korea, and Suki Kim's memoir of being an English teacher to elite students there also shows us just a portion of it, but what she finds is eye-opening. Her book is Without You, There Is No Us, My Time with the Sons of North Korea's Elite. Here's some of the highlights from my interview with Suki Kim. So you spent around 5-6 months in North Korea teaching the elite of North Korea. Mm-hmm. Well, tell us, let's start with that. What is the elite of North Korea?
Well, I've been visiting North Korea since 2002 as a journalist, and I quickly found that I did a piece for the New York Review of Books and Harper's. I've covered the New York Philharmonic in Pyongyang also in 2008, and I quickly discovered that there was no way of really writing anything meaningful about North Korea unless I was embedded there. So when I found out about this school that was being privately funded and built and staffed with foreigners, I applied for a job, and then I went in 2011. The school was set up at the end of 2010, and I realized I found myself in this boarding school in a suburb of Pyongyang with 270 all male 19 to 20-year-old young men in this compound that was guarded by military.
One of the things that you explore in your book, you don't really explore the Arab Spring because you couldn't have followed much about it. You only had access to some information, but certainly your students had access to no information.
None.
About the Arab Spring, about anything. And on a daily basis, what was that lockdown of information like for them? And again, that these are the people who would have had the best access to information among anybody their age in the whole country.
Well, I mean, they were very sheltered. You know, they didn't even know where their friends were. They were not allowed to keep in touch with their family, and they were not allowed to leave the compound. So I had access. The teachers had. We were basically separated in a faculty dormitory. None of us were allowed out, but we had access to heavily monitored internet connection and CNN Asia. And the students did not have anything at all. They didn't even know the existence of the internet. But, you know, this is sort of this vacuum that North Koreans live in anyway. No information comes in or out.
There are some cracks in that veneer where you would see moments of revelation that these kids know more than they're letting on, or they know more than they're supposed to know. At some points, you would see some little bits, right?
Because we live together, and I think that was only possible. You know, this is why I think being embedded was so important, because you just basically get sound bites. If you ever go to North Korea to try to cover North Korea, the only way of doing that is with a government sponsorship. So you would be selling the North Korean regime's agenda, you know, being their publicist. So, but by living with them on a daily basis, and they were young, you know, 19 and 20, it's just kids. So they sometimes would slip. You know, for example, the way they celebrate their birthdays, they just gather in their dormitory room and sing because they have nothing else. And I would ask them, what kind of song do you sing? And always the answer is the same. The song about the great leader, song about friendship, song about the motherland. One time, one student said, rock and roll. The minute he said that, just the table went silent. And because I ate every meals with them. So, you know, the other students just suddenly lowered their faces, and he looked around quickly to see who heard him. And I realized this was something that should not have been said, and I changed the topic. So it's that to that degree of, you know, watchfulness and fear.
You can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable. You can also listen to the full audio of Up Close as a podcast, available on iTunes or on your favorite podcast player. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish channel, be well. The Jewish channel is available on cable, Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOUPLING Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast on the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.